everybody. Good afternoon. I saw the introduction. I'm just a tech guy, but hopefully what we'll do today is talk a little bit about tech. So I want to start with a quick thesis, and it's something that I've heard quite a bit in industry. It's that OT environments are unique. There is unique risks, there's unique architectures, and because of that, we also need technology that is built for OT and those environments specifically. Seems perfectly reasonable, but I contend it's actually wrong, very wrong, because at the end of the day, at least in my opinion, the underlying technology in both IT and OT environments are basically identical, and that would mean that a lot of the tools that your IT colleagues might use actually do make a lot of sense in OT. It might be a bit of a hot take here, especially at S4, but I'm not even really sure what OT remote access is, to be perfectly honest. I think at the end of the day, you're connecting to a Windows workstation or an embedded device or a switch or something like that. That happens in IT too. I think what's really important when we're going and we're talking about technology is that there actually is specialized risk in OT. There is different architectures. There are different implementation requirements. But I don't necessarily think, with some exceptions, that the technology itself has to be different, which is great news for people like us in OT, because that opens up a wide breadth of options of tried and true IT technology that we can use to secure our facilities. As a matter of fact, I've seen personally deployed, and I've done it myself, where an IT technology that almost is never seen in the OT environment, based on the requirements, can actually be much more appropriate for an OT environment than some of the OT-specific tools out there. But typically what happens is that for IT technology specifically, these IT solutions, particularly cybersecurity, the management plane is going to the cloud. It just is. So is that really appropriate for OT? I would actually contend that it is. It actually makes things a little bit easier for us, particularly myself being an asset owner for quite some time. We'll go over it a little bit later, but the idea would be is that you can focus your efforts less on the infrastructure, the underlying infrastructure, backup, recovery, HA, power supplies, all that stuff, and really concentrate on what makes the difference for your business. Now, of course, there's regulations out there. Totally, there are always regulations out there, and this probably wouldn't be an S4 talk if I didn't try to do something AI. So I did, and I failed miserably. So I just put the prompt up here, essentially saying like, hey, yes, there are NERC CIP regulations. That is changing. I've been on part of those calls with NERC. But what is the real percentage of industrial facilities that have these regulations? And I asked ChatGPT, and it fucked up. I don't know. I have no idea. So I figured that I might be a really bad prompt engineer. So I begged it again, like, can you really tell me what's the percentage of NERC CIP regulated industrial facilities? And it's still trash. But what really matters here is that I think we can all agree that the amount of regulated facilities is actually pretty darn low. It's pretty low, and typically the requirement for things not to be in the cloud from a technology perspective and the management plane of cybersecurity in OT environments is typically self-inflicted, almost all the time, and sometimes for good reason. But what I want to do is I want to go over some of the perhaps differences or some of the pros and cons of leveraging the technology that's been developed for IT and has been battle-hardened for IT for many years, and maybe it actually does make sense for us. So let's go, everything has its pros and cons, and on-premises, I'm not saying that's a really crappy option. There's a lot of reasons to do it. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to explore it just a little bit. And probably the biggest one I hear all the time is that I have control over my infrastructure. It's mine. I understand exactly what's going on. I have complete visibility of my data flows going in and out of the infrastructure to the OT services DMZ. I have a single ingress and egress point, preferably going from the plant floor out. But there's a ton of cons, especially when we're talking about the realities of being an asset owner. I've been there. And the reality is that security is a cost, not a feature as an asset owner. We make money by selling the stuff that our facilities make. We, as security professionals, almost all the time, we are a cost center, not a profit center. And as much as our executives care about cybersecurity, it doesn't change the fact that we're a cost center. The other thing, of course, is with those limited budgets that you may have, there's so much other stuff you have to deal with that is not differentiating for your organization. Understanding how to stand up a hypervisor and how to stand up another VM, whether it's Hyper-V or ESXi, who gives a shit? It doesn't matter. It doesn't change your organization. What matters is the tool that you decide and how it meets your requirements and how you maintain its configuration over time. That's what matters, not what the underlying infrastructure is. And with a cash-strapped organization, focus on the stuff that actually matters for your organization. You might have outdated technology. I'm sure a lot of you guys, if there is a mandate for on-premise, I remember hearing about this on the NERC calls specifically, was that we are forced to use outdated technology because the best-in-class vendors don't even supply on-premise anymore. And we're forced to use old technology or deprecated technology just because. And I think that's a bit of a shame, right? We should use the best that we have, especially for the environments that we're protecting. And the last one is the compliance paperwork. This is not for the feds or anything like that, but if any organizations that I've worked in, making changes, and if there's proper change management, that takes time, man. It takes time to do hardware refreshes, to do any sort of changes. That's just wasted effort that you guys shouldn't have to deal with. But let's do the same sort of exercise with SaaS. One of the pros, and perhaps a con, is that you delegate that entire infrastructure to the vendor. It is not your problem no more. And a lot of times that can be quite freeing. It can also be a little bit dangerous, but it can be quite freeing for your team to focus on the stuff that's important. And for a lot of these vendors, the good ones anyway, is the security of their product is the profit center or a profit center for their organization. They are incentivized as a company to secure their product. Do they do it every time? No, that's not what I'm saying. But I can say that they're probably better funded and have more incentive to do it than you would as an asset owner. At least that's been my experience. Another one is that you can easily change vendors. A lot of times, you may put a vendor in there, it may not make sense for your business, or you may, have another DCS or something like that, and you have to change vendors. It can be a lot easier to, instead of ripping out the existing infrastructure, just putting in something new, is just you take off the agents, put other agents on, update your firewall rules, you're off to the races. But the most important pro, I think, is that it gives you time, a lot of time, and it gives you time to really, really, really dive deep down into configuration and log review of your cybersecurity tools. It is so, so, so critically important. I always use the scenario where you have an IT, OT perimeter firewall, and it's being taken into consideration for risk assessments. It's in every architecture drawing. People think that there's a baseline of cybersecurity because you have that pretty red box on your architecture drawings. It's bullshit. Mostly what happens is, it's the second law of thermodynamics for firewalls. They always devolve into chaos every single time, and essentially what you end up is an expensive router. You want to spend the time to make sure that configuration is correct, not that Panorama, is on-premise and not in the cloud. Like, who cares? Of course, the cons, there are cons. You don't have total control and visibility, but that's okay because you should have visibility based on what your requirements are to the things that matter. Configuration changes, data flows, stuff like that. You probably don't care if the underlying VM infrastructure went through an HA failover. Like, who cares? As long as you got it, who cares? And of course, vendors can make changes without your permission. Of course, the prototypical one is that of like CrowdStrike. That would have been it's really shitty for OT for that sort of thing to happen. But there are ways around that, of course, is that you can have in your procurement language or your technical requirements is that any update that is pushed from the cloud has to at least be able to be delayed, paused, or eliminated. That's just a requirement of the technology. It doesn't matter if it's a cloud technology or not. That's just a requirement that you may have for your organization. So there's a TLDR here, right? So the biggest thing is you can outsource the drudgery of infrastructure managed to your vendor. It's not your problem anymore. It's nice, it's easy. You can leverage that team of motivated cybersecurity professionals to work for you. You can also leverage the lessons learned from your IT colleagues. They have important shit too. They absolutely do. If they have SAP or whatever, like that's the beating heart of an organization. It's super, super important. Leverage those battle scars and use that same technology if it satisfies your requirements. And then, of course, focus on the things that make the most difference here. But again, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, there are two serious caveats, and that is that you have to be ridiculously careful about the vendor you choose. And usually how that ends up getting realized is in procurement language, and that sucks, and that's just the reality though, is that technology that doesn't meet your requirements doesn't even make it in the door. They're not even a contender. It's actually part of procurement, and I apologize if there's procurement people here, but I hate you. And of course, you have to be super, super, super hyper-focused on that configuration management. You can spend so much money on tools, and I know this is intuitively obvious, but I've seen it all over the place, is that you spend a lot of money on tools, and they ain't configured properly, and they might as well be useless. As a matter of fact, they're worse than useless, because you take credit for things that you shouldn't. So what about, if you still do things against the Purdue model, how does that work, right? In the Purdue model, level 1 stuff can't go to level 5. I don't know what the cloud is, 5.5. I mean, the TLDR of that is, who gives a shit? The Purdue model was and never was supposed to be used for designing OT networks. Not now, not ever. It is a reference model. It is absolutely a reference model to be used to understand the layout of things and perhaps its communication paths in an OT infrastructure. Don't design networks that way. We'll talk a little bit about how I believe you should, but from a Purdue perspective, I don't think that's an argument to make is, cloud doesn't comply with the Purdue model. You shouldn't be designing to that anyway. So, but architecture is still ridiculously important. So, I'm sure everyone has heard of this here, but instead of the Purdue model and having lengthy arguments about, is this thing a level 1 device or a 2 device? Oh crap, maybe it's a 2.5 or a 2.25 or whatever, who cares? What you want to do is you have your asset, and that asset has certain communication requirements, it has certain functionality requirements, and it may have also requirements around what it can do to the physical process. Group those things together into a zone. Doesn't matter if it's on the plant floor, doesn't matter if it's in your corporate data center, doesn't matter if it's in the cloud. It's about the stuff and you putting zones together and making conduits between them. It's really that simple, and Purdue levels don't even come into the conversation because in my opinion, they shouldn't. So if you do that and you define zones that can have direct internet access and you're very intentional about those firewall rules, again, critically important, and any NGFW worth its salt today can do deep packet inspection of OT traffic, it can do SSL inspection, all that good stuff. So I would contend for most of your zones, except for the absolute most critical, like your SIS, they can pop out to the internet as long as that traffic's inspected and as long as the data flow that's coming back and forth can't affect the physical process, it's just configuration changes. Why not? What's the big deal? So, but again, you gotta pay attention to that configuration of that firewall. And it's something we should be doing anyway. Even if there is an on-premise solution or using an on-premise technology, that firewall is taken into account in risk assessments so often, and it is so often misconfigured. So pay particular attention to that and any sort of separation you have between two different zones. And it doesn't matter if that zone is the enterprise or the cloud or whatever. It is a zone that has more risk to it than perhaps something on the plant floor. So I want to go through a couple of scenarios, I guess. So here's just a regular network diagram. It's totally generic, but things are separated into zones and conduits, and you have all of your tech stack in that purple box. So these are just 4 different things, no problem. I'm sure there are more, but you have those little purple boxes underneath. That is all the additional stuff that you as a security practitioner or infrastructure practitioner have to worry about. Not value add. It's not value add at all. The only stuff that is value add are those blue boxes in there and how they're configured. The hypervisor, the security monitoring, the hardware refresh and procurement, not value add to you. And I'll add one additional thing, and this may or may not be the case in your organization, but I suspect it is the proliferation of MFA in industrial environments, which is a great thing, absolutely a great thing, particularly for remote access. But the minute you do that, you've synced identities to the cloud. Like if you're using, Entra ID or Okta or any other IDP out there, you are synchronizing identities to the cloud, and those identities are the keys of your kingdom. That's it. That's just how it is. So perhaps if you are using MFA, except for some, I can probably count on my hand how many on-premise MFA vendors there are anymore. It's RSA. I don't know. It might be like one more. But you're probably synchronizing identities to the cloud. So like the cat's out of the bag, guys. We've already done it. We're there if you're using something like Entra ID or Okta, which many, many people are. So you're already there. Your keys of your kingdom are already in the cloud. Spend the time making sure that Entra ID and Okta are configured correctly. But let's say that we want to do more of a SaaS solution or a cloud-based solution. In my mind, and we've done this before, is the OT cybersecurity services DMZ just goes away. Just goes away entirely. You don't need it anymore. That's not to say that you may not have a DMZ for things like Pi or engineering services data or whatever. But for OT cybersecurity products, they can just pop directly out to the internet, go to whatever tenant that they're going to, and that's great. It's less stuff for you as an OT cybersecurity practitioner to worry about. You still have the issue of having identities migrated to the cloud. That's okay though, because you're not distracted anymore. You can spend that time really monitoring what's going on with those identities, how they're being used, who's trying to get in, all that sort of stuff. Those are available from your cloud providers, and you've bought yourself that time. Down below that firewall, nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. You don't have to worry about that. We're not talking about IP address changes or any of that very nasty stuff that causes disruption in plant floor. What we're really looking at here is everything above that perimeter firewall that now you have the time to actually do configuration management on. So from a plant floor perspective, nothing really changes, but you have bought yourself a lot of extra time because you don't have that purple infrastructure to worry about. So some key takeaways, right? None of this stuff is complex, but I do ask that it's time today, in my opinion, that we stop thinking as cloud cybersecurity products as not fit for OT. I'm not a technology vendor at all, so I don't really have too much skin in this game other than I think it's the right decision for this industry. And SaaS, when managed correctly, can have enormous benefits, usually around time. It can be around security. It almost certainly is security if you leverage it correctly. And the third one is, and again, I might get some hate mail here, but when a vendor says that their solution is built for OT, like what does that really mean? Is that a marketing term, or does it really offer some benefits that really, really make sense for our environment? I would really challenge that because in my mind, in most cases, if they have a great product, it can work in IT or OT. It doesn't have to stand just as an OT product unless it makes sense from a marketing standpoint. From a tech standpoint, I don't see it. And then from a tech standpoint, again, I've been doing OT my entire career. I don't think we're that special, but that's great. That's awesome because we can leverage what's going on in IT to help us out as OT security practitioners. We shouldn't just say, like, our stuff is special, we can't use yours. That makes no sense to me. We should leverage that. And then the last one, and perhaps the most important, is configuration of that tech trumps the tech itself every single time. Every time. You can put in a $100 firewall or a $500,000 firewall. If it has an any rule on it, it's trash. So just keep that in mind. Again, that is my opinion, but I'm happy to hear what you guys have to say. That's all I have for now. Thank you guys so much, and if you have any questions, I'm here to take them. I appreciate it.
Hello, I have a question. Kelly Stitch. I work for a company that makes an on-premise technology solution, so don't hold that against me. But I used to be an OT professional. I always treated the IT system as a cloud anyways, whether it's private or, for that matter, even public. The one thing that I always struggled with is getting past the barrier of, if something goes wrong on that SaaS platform, my data is now on the internet.
Totally.
How do you get around that?
Yeah, and I think the reality is that you don't, but the good news is that that data, for the most part, unless you're doing like closed loop control, which I am not advocating, that data is kind of unimportant. Like, that asset data is important to you as an asset owner, but it's really not all that important, in my opinion, to even sort of an adversary. It's not great that it's gone, but I think that weighing the risks is there's a better chance of you having the correct configurations in place that even if somebody has that data, that the infrastructure is still protected. So at the end of the day, risk reward, I think that the risk is worth it.
Hey, Eric, I've got a question for you too. So I'm coming from the IT landscape into the OT landscape. And one of the challenges that I've faced having conversations with a business about shifting towards cloud is this CapEx versus OpEx conversation. Maybe
totally.
That's not for here, but would you be having the same conversations around configuration management and that type, or is there some strategy you recommend?
From a financial standpoint, or?
Yeah, when looking to convince the business to make that cloud migration shift both mentally but also monetarily.
Sure. I mean, yeah, sometimes, it just depends on the business. Like, sometimes they want to capitalize, sometimes they want it in an OpEx budget, for sure, and I've seen it happen both ways. But from a financial standpoint, where I think it helps quite a bit is that there's a lot of times you're just not getting more budget, and you're not getting more headcount, and that's just the reality. So spend that time that you already have and say, hey guys, like, if we get rid of this infrastructure, we don't need increased headcount. We don't have to worry about that. We just shift our priorities to things that help the business, and I think that really speaks to upper management. Cool. Awesome, guys. Well, thank you. I appreciate you.